Good evening, everybody. Well, I'll be taking a step back from what we've been discussing all this while. Presenters had spoken about social media, the impact of different aspects from different channels in which public is reaching out to the police, to the public safety agencies. I'll be taking a step back in terms of how public safety internally can reach out to the first responders on the ground to serve the public. Well, the main aspect about police communication is mobility. Now, we're not talking about a control room managing the complete public safety aspect. We're talking about a control room managing the flow of information from the public to the first responder on the ground. Now, it could be a PCR van, it could be a road outpost of police, it could be a beat constable. Those are the actual guys who need to get that information in real-time mode to act upon that information. It could be actually saving someone's life, property, and so forth. So that's where the whole communication network for police becomes paramount important. And wireless communication is the most important medium for police communication. So what are the typical requirements for this kind of a wireless communication network? Well, one thing to understand is that this is unlike your typical GSM cellular communication. In that communication, your calls can drop, your calls might not go through, there's congestion, and so forth. The calls typically are from person A to person B. While over here in police communication is more of a group communication mode in terms of one to many. It's basically a dispatch application. The control room gets information on which it has to act, and it transfers that information to multiple stakeholders within the police agency, on the ground, in the offices, and so forth. So it's one-to-many communication in real-time mode that has to happen. It cannot happen that the call of a police person doesn't go through. It has to go through. That is the whole pedigree on which the distributed communication has been built. Fast call setup, highly resilient and reliable, highly efficient, giving proper coverage for the entire police force. As I said, the main aspect of police communication is mobility. It could be on the road, it could be in the vehicle, but it's all links across to mobility because the police people have to be moving around in different aspects in different areas. It's all about moving that information from the control room to the first responder. Just imagine that you're calling a dial 100 number. It reaches the control room. The control room has to act on that information, for that information to be shared across to a first responder to act upon it. So it's all about moving that information to the point of action. And that's where the wireless communication network comes into picture. Typical key requirements for this kind of a network. One is highly resilient. You have issues like spectrum, you have issues like congestion, you have issues like call dropping, you have issues like network failures. Typically here the cell site is down, so there's no signal in that area. It can't happen in police communication. Just imagine that a police person says that I couldn't entertain a request from a civil society because the sites over there was down. I couldn't reach the police person on the road over there. It's unacceptable. Spectrum, control, effective dispatching, effective control in terms of dispatching the information, and a secured network for communicating that information on which nobody can have access to. We're talking about a police communication network, and many of us think that why can't police use a GSM network? There's a difference in that. Police needs a private, secure, reliable network. You might argue that even the same thing can be done on a GSM network. The answer is no. Just think about a typical scenario on a New Year Eve. How many of you have gone through an issue of SMS not going through, calls not getting through? But that doesn't bother you. You maybe after an hour make another attempt, the call goes through. Have the same scenario for a police officer who is attending to public safety requirements on a New Year Eve using a GSM phone. would that be okay and appropriate for him to have a similar communication mode? And answer is no. I think that is where the importance lies for having our own dedicated private network for police usage. Even for a simple example, giving you a correlation, for a dial 100 kind of a thing that you reach out to police, police has in turn multiple lines for its own usage for a dial 100, so that the call of a civil society person can reach to the police. So on a similar line, even for the internal communication requirement for police, they need to have a highly robust, resilient, and reliable network on which they can reach out to their internal agents who are on the field over the first responders. This is a typical example from a report from Pentagon based upon the 9/11 incident in the US. And that's what they mentioned in time of crisis. The networks get overloaded and they're not suitable. I'm talking about the commercial networks, not suitable for public safety agencies to use the network. Another key typical example is of natural disasters. Sir mentioned about disaster management. Absolutely. I mean, it could be artificial, it could be man-made, it could be natural, floods, earthquake, bomb blast, could be anything. But what happens at that moment of time is basically panic. And in that panic state, you have everybody trying to reach out to everybody. The channels of communication, network has typically some X channels. The channels get clogged up, communication can't go through. Another same issue in terms of using a commercial network. Another need for having a private network only to be used by public safety agencies. We have seen that in recent times in India as well. A typical example I've put across over here is the Bombay blast. The ministers and the government officials and the functionaries could not reach out to the on-ground first responders of public safety agencies because they were trying to reach out on a GSM or other kind of commercial networks which were absolutely clogged and congested. There was a lack of police's own radio network for it to effectively and efficiently take care of the situation. Let's look at the Indian context for police communication. I fully agree about the role of social media and how it has been envisaging the whole aspect and changing the paradigm shift for communication requirement. But I think let's take a step back and look at how the Indian context it fits in over there. For police communication, I think still the very basic bottom line lies in voice communication. These things can all be taken care of as a supplementary aspect in terms of a Facebook tweet going into the control room, in terms of a short message coming across the control room, in terms of a dial 100 call coming to the control room. But what actually and eventually matters is that police control room reaching out to the first responder on the ground to help the victim, to serve the victim. So that is where I think again the basic voice communication is of paramount importance. I was recently at a conference and I heard about the fact that what is the first and best mode of communication in a disaster? And it won't be a wild guess. The answer was that shout, help. That is the first and best mode of communication in a disaster. Nothing more than that. In recently hurricanes, as you might have seen, all set sites were destroyed. The only mode of communication was those typical two-way walkie-talkie handsets on which the public safety agencies were interacting with each other and responding to the disaster. Just a sample illustration of a typical state police organization in India. You have the EHQ, you have the district headquarters, followed by the police stations and the outposts, followed by the beat constables on the ground. From our experience, what we have seen are the key expectations in terms of a police wireless communication network. Secured voice communication. Cost efficient, of course, which again links across to spectral efficiency, because spectrum, I'm sure you might all have read across about the 2G issues going across in the country. Spectrum is really scarce in this country. So a technology that can give a cost-effective, spectrally efficient solution is of paramount importance. Interfacing to the existing legacy systems, we have the HF, VHF, old legacy systems of the police running across. We can't dispose them off. So there has to be a technology platform which can give a solution to link across and carry forward those legacy systems while moving across to a digital system as well. Device options, multiple devices as per the user needs. It could be a person on the ground having a small portable device like this in his hand. It could be a vehicle of a police person, a PCR van, which requires a radio into the dashboard. Different requirements for different people. Interfacing to the external systems. DAL 100 is a typical example. AVLS, as we call it, which is basically a location tracking system. Locating the PCR van or the beat constable on the road so that you can actually hit across on that person to give them the information in the first hand. And finally, integration to PABX, PSTN. Add-on requirements for data are also slowly coming in. But from the understanding that we have had with police officials, the basic necessity for requirements still lies on these basic facets. This is a typical police radio network. You have the police headquarters, which will have a vehicle location system, a dial 100 system, a network management system. It will have a dispatch control room setup. On the left side, you have the external subsystems on which you have to integrate and interface, PSTN, PABX, existing HF, VHF legacy systems. And you'll have a repeater sites across the city, state, district to give across the coverage. So what essentially comes into the picture then is basically the integrated command and control. I think that is the heart for the police communication network. When you dial across a dial 100, you send across to a control room, all the information is coming to the control room, and the control room acting as a monitor to manage the information flow from the civil society to the first responder. I spoke about spectrum being a scarce resource in the country, and I'll just put across a new thought process on the similar lines. And sharing spectrum can actually save lives. And from where I'm coming is talking about a shared network for different agencies. Sir mentioned about different stakeholders involved in a disaster, in a public safety kind of a mission, and I fully agree with that. You have medicals, you have fire, you have paramedics, you have disaster teams, and so forth, besides the typical on-ground police team who have to take care of that epidemic, that disaster that has happened on the ground. If they all are on different systems, how do they communicate to each other? That's a very basic problem of integration, of interoperability. And the mission for this kind of agencies is basically to collaborate and respond in the quickest possible time to save property, to save human life. The calls on such networks can actually save lives. That's the difference in this kind of a network and any other kind of a network.
Raghav, we'll have to wind up at 5:30.
On just 3 slides more, ma'am. Talking about an example of GRN, there's a government radio network. It was done across in Delhi, in collaboration with HCL. Motorola did this implementation of a GRN in Delhi. It's used by multiple agencies. As many as 17 agencies are using a common network, which is giving coverage to the whole of Delhi, so that they can collaborate effectively and efficiently in a timely manner. Just a small look at the technologies that are available today. APCO P25, which comes from US, and Tetra, which comes from US, HC. These are the two technologies recommended by ITU for use for public safety and disaster relief. Both are truly open standards, both are highly resilient, and both give the functionalities of voice and supplementary data on the same single device in the hands of a police user. Deployments of APCO P25 across 80 countries and similarly for Tetra, more than 100 countries. Motorola looks upon that as a technology solution that can act across barriers. We need the police to concentrate on the mission, not on the technology on which they're using to serve the mission. And that's where we see going forward the future for public safety. To conclude, I think the need of the hour is to have a framework for police communication modernization, a framework which defines technologies, key functional requirements, harmonization of technologies, and finally, to promote a shared network kind of a thing so that different agencies can collaborate and respond more effectively. Thank you.